The world had a cruel sense of humor, and I was about to be the punchline. If you had asked me a month ago, I would have said my marriage was solid, unshakable, even. Sarah and I had been together for 9 years, married for 6. We had a home filled with memories, laughter, and what I thought was unbreakable trust. My name is Daniel, and I was a fool. It started with subtle changes, the kind that creep in so slowly you barely notice them. Sarah became more distant, her laughter felt forced, and her phone never left her hand. She started dressing differently, more effort in her appearance, new lingerie that never made an appearance in our bedroom. She had new friends from work she'd never mentioned before, and suddenly, late nights at the office became the norm rather than the exception. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to be the husband who trusted his wife, who chalked up the changes to stress or midlife crisis nonsense. But gut instincts don't lie, and the growing pit in my stomach was proof that something was very, very wrong. Then came the whispers. Friends giving me looks filled with pity, my best friend hesitating before speaking, as if debating whether or not to tell me something I wouldn't want to hear. I should have confronted it then. I should have looked her in the eye and demanded answers. Instead, I chose to wait, to watch, to gather the evidence I needed to confirm what my heart already suspected. One thing was certain, if my wife thought she could make a fool out of me, she had another thing coming. The truth was out there, and I was going to find it. The confirmation I needed came on a Wednesday. I had spent the past week looking for anything concrete, something that would strip away the last of my doubts. Sarah had been careful, but no one is perfect. It started with a mistake, a single notification that flashed across her phone while she was in the shower. A name I didn't recognize, a message that was too familiar, too intimate. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't need to. Instead, I decided to follow the pattern she had unknowingly laid out. Thursday nights were her work dinners, a convenient excuse that gave her the freedom to do whatever she wanted without any suspicion. That night, instead of going home after work, I followed her. She left the office in a rush, her car heading in a direction that had nothing to do with the restaurant she had mentioned that morning. I kept my distance, making sure I was never close enough to be noticed but never far enough to lose sight of her. 10 minutes later, she pulled into a small hotel parking lot. A place that wasn't meant for casual business meetings. A place that told me everything before I even saw what happened next. I waited. My fingers clenched around the steering wheel as I watched her step out of the car, her expression shifting into something I hadn't seen in months: anticipation, excitement. It wasn't for me. The man who approached her was older, well-dressed, confident. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look around, didn't check her phone, didn't act like someone who was doing something wrong. Because in her mind, she wasn't. She had already rewritten the story, adjusted her reality to fit whatever lie she had been telling herself. I took pictures. Not because I needed them, but because she would try to lie. She would try to twist the truth into something easier for her to swallow. When they disappeared inside the hotel, I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where my wife had stood just minutes ago. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. Not yet. What I felt was control. The uncertainty was gone, the waiting was over. I knew what I had to do next. I went home, printed the photos, and placed them on the kitchen table. Then I waited. When Sarah came home later that night, she acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, told me about her dinner. I let her speak, let her dig herself deeper into her story. Then I pointed to the table. She didn't move at first. Her eyes flicked to the pictures, then to me, then back to the pictures. I watched the blood drain from her face, her lips parting as if she were about to say something, but no words came. She wasn't ready. She had been caught, but she hadn't figured out how to react yet. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Say something. Her hands trembled as she reached for the photos. This isn't what it looks like. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. Really? Because it looks exactly like what it is. She shook her head, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Daniel, please, let me explain. I let her. I let her sit there and try to salvage whatever she thought could still be saved. She spoke in half-truths, in excuses that meant nothing. Work stress. Feeling disconnected. Making a mistake. She said she still loved me. She said it had only happened once. Then twice. Then she stopped trying to count. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to see how far she would go, how many different versions of the truth she would try before she finally realized it didn't matter. I had heard enough. When she was done, I stood up, walked past her, and went to the bedroom. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed. And now, it was my turn to decide what happened next. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, my thoughts running in circles, playing through every possible scenario of what I could do next. I had the truth. I had proof. But what was I supposed to do with it? Just leave? Scream at her? Break something? None of it felt like enough. None of it felt like it would match the depth of her betrayal. I needed her to feel it. I needed her to understand what she had done. The next morning, I got up before she did. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the photographs again. They looked different in the daylight. More real. More damning. When Sarah finally came downstairs, she hesitated when she saw me. Her eyes flickered to the table, then back to me. She knew what was coming. She had spent the night thinking about it too. I pushed a chair out for her. Sit. She did. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee mug, like it could somehow ground her. She opened her mouth, but I stopped her before she could speak. No more lies, I said. No more excuses. I want the truth. All of it. She swallowed hard. Daniel, I slammed my fist on the table. The sound was loud, sharp, final. She jumped. The truth, Sarah. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not this time. She had made her choices, and now it was time for her to own them. It started a few months ago, she admitted. At first, it was just talking. I never meant for it to happen, I swear. I didn't plan it. I scoffed. You didn't plan it? You met up with him. You slept with him. You lied to me, to my face, every single day. That doesn't just happen. She shook her head. I felt lost. I don't know. It wasn't about you, I promise. Don't give me that, I snapped. You don't get to sit there and pretend this was some accident. You made choices. Every single day, you chose to do this. She started crying then, shoulders shaking as she covered her face with her hands. I watched her, but I felt nothing. The woman in front of me wasn't my wife. She was a stranger. I want to fix this, she whispered. I love you. I laughed, shaking my head. You love me? Do you even hear yourself? You don't do this to someone you love. Silence filled the room. She didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't one. She finally looked up, her red eyes pleading. I know I hurt you, but I was lost. I wasn't thinking clearly. I felt like something was missing in my life. Something was missing? I asked, my voice steady but firm. So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to sleep with someone else? That was your solution? She nodded slowly, ashamed. I know I messed up. You didn't just mess up, Sarah, I told back. You shattered everything. You turned our marriage into a joke. She sniffled, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. I never wanted to hurt you. I stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen, the frustration bubbling under my skin. Do you even understand what you've done? Every time you came home and kissed me, you were lying. Every time you smiled at me, you were hiding something. You made a fool out of me. I was scared, she muttered. Scared of what would happen if I told you how I felt. I turned to face her. So instead, you betrayed me? She had no answer. Just silence and guilt written all over her face. I shook my head. I trusted you, Sarah. I gave you everything. And you threw it all away. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. Please, Daniel. Please don't do this. I looked at her for a long moment, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wanted to scream at her, to let my rage take over, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me completely broken. I grabbed my keys and turned towards the door. Before leaving, I stopped and looked back at her one last time. You'll find out soon enough. Then I walked out, leaving her alone with her guilt and the consequences of what she had done. I drove without a destination, the city lights blurring past as I tried to calm the storm raging inside me. Every streetlight, every passing car, felt like a reminder of the lie I had been living. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, was nothing more than a fraud. I had given her everything, and she repaid me with betrayal. The rage inside me was no longer just a burning ember, it was an inferno, demanding justice. And I was going to deliver it. I pulled into a parking lot and took out my phone. My mind was sharp now, calculating. She had destroyed my life, but I wouldn't let her walk away unscathed. I scrolled through my contacts and found Mark's number. The man she had chosen over me. He had no idea what was coming. I hit call. Hello? His voice was calm, unaware of who was on the other end of the line. You don't know me, but I know you. I know exactly what you've been doing with my wife, I said, my voice cold. Silence. Then a cautious, who is this? Daniel. Sarah's husband. A long pause. Listen, man, Shut up, I cut him off. I don't want to hear your excuses. I just thought you should know that Sarah isn't some innocent victim in this. And you? You're nothing but a fool who got caught in something bigger than you can handle. He tried to speak again, but I ended the call. He would be panicking now, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Good. Let him sweat. Next, I sent an email. Sarah's boss needed to know what kind of person she really was. She had been sneaking around under the guise of work, using her job as an excuse to betray me. I attached the photos I had taken of her meeting Mark at the hotel, along with the dates and times of her supposed late nights at the office. It wouldn't take long before her entire professional reputation came crashing down. Then came the finances. I had been smart over the years, making sure everything important was in my name. The house, the savings, even her car, all legally mine. I contacted my lawyer and set the process in motion. By the end of the week, Sarah would have nothing but the clothes on her back. If she thought she could walk away from this without consequences, she was in for a brutal awakening. It was late by the time I returned home. Sarah was still sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. She looked up when I entered, hopeful, desperate. Daniel, where did you go? I didn't answer. Instead, I placed my phone on the table and played the recording I had made earlier that day, our confrontation. Her voice, full of guilt, confessing everything. She paled as she listened, her breath hitching when she realized what I had done. What is this? She whispered. Insurance, I replied. So you can't twist the truth when I'm done with you. Tears streamed down her face. Please, don't do this. We can fix this. I leaned forward, staring her down. You made your choice, Sarah. Now you live with it. I walked past her and up the stairs. She didn't follow. She knew there was nothing left to say. The next morning, I woke up feeling nothing. No sadness, no anger, just emptiness. Sarah was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, looking like a shell of the woman I once knew. Her eyes were swollen, her hands gripping a cup of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her together. When I walked in, she sat up straight, but she didn't speak. She was waiting for me to say something, to give her some kind of sign that there was still hope. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. For a few moments, we just stared at each other. Then I took a deep breath. It's over, Sarah. Her hands clenched around the mug. Daniel, please. No, I interrupted. You don't get to beg. You don't get to ask me to forget what you did. She swallowed, blinking rapidly. I don't want to lose you. I shook my head. You already did. Her lip quivered, but she nodded like she had expected my answer. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then don't say anything, I said. I've spent the last few days trying to understand, trying to figure out if there was any way to fix this. But there isn't. I can't trust you. I can't even look at you without remembering how you lied to me, how you snuck around behind my back. Tears started to fall down her face, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. I made a mistake, she said weakly. No, Sarah, I said firmly. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or missing an appointment. What you did was deliberate. You made a choice over and over again. She wiped at her tears, her breathing shaky. What happens now? I reached into my pocket and placed a folder on the table. Divorce papers, I said. I've already spoken to my lawyer. You don't get the house. You don't get the savings. You don't get anything. She stared at the folder, her eyes wide in shock. Daniel. Everything is in my name, I continued. You can try to fight it, but I promise you, you won't win. Her shoulders slumped. She knew I was right. She had nothing to stand on. I don't want your money, she whispered. I just want you. I laughed bitterly. Now you do? Now that everything's falling apart? Where was this when you were sneaking off to hotels with him? She didn't answer. I stood up. Sign the papers, Sarah. Make this easy. She looked up at me, her face pale. And if I don't? I leaned down, looking her straight in the eye. Then I make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. I won't stop at your job. I'll make sure your family, your friends, and everyone you care about sees those photos and hears that recording. You won't just lose me, you'll lose everything. Her lips parted slightly, a small gasp escaping. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She picked up the folder with shaking hands and flipped through the pages. When she finally looked up, her expression was hollow. You really hate me that much? I exhaled sharply. I don't hate you, Sarah. I just don't care about you anymore. Silence filled the room. The weight of finality settled between us. For the first time, I saw true regret in her eyes, not just guilt, but the realization that she had destroyed something that could never be repaired. I turned and walked away. There was nothing left to say. I didn't look back as I left the house. The sound of my footsteps echoed in my ears, but my mind was quiet. No doubts, no second thoughts, just the cold certainty that I had made the right decision. Sarah had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. I got in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first, just that I needed to be anywhere but there. I ended up at a diner on the outskirts of town, a place I hadn't been in years. It was nearly empty, just an old couple in the corner and a waitress who looked half asleep. I ordered a coffee and sat there, staring at my hands. The past week had felt like a lifetime. Everything I had believed about my marriage, my wife, my life, it had all been a lie. And now, standing at the end of it, I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. But one thing was clear, I wasn't the same man who had walked into that house a few nights ago, suspicious but hopeful. That man was gone. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from my lawyer. The divorce papers were officially filed. It was real now. Sarah would be served in the next few days, and the process would begin. It was only a matter of time before it was finalized. The idea of being divorced hadn't fully sunk in yet, but there was no sadness. Just relief. I thought about Sarah, about the way she had looked at me when I told her I didn't care anymore. Maybe she had thought there was still a chance, that I would let my emotions get the best of me and forgive her. But she didn't understand. It wasn't anger that had driven me to leave. It was indifference. And indifference was far worse than hatred. She had become nothing more than a stranger to me. I sat there for over an hour, sipping my coffee and thinking about everything that had led me to this moment. The betrayal, the confrontation, the plans I had made to ensure she paid for what she had done. I had done everything necessary, but I still felt a lingering emptiness. It wasn't regret, but rather an absence, something missing inside me, something I had lost along with my marriage. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through old photos. Pictures of us together, smiling at family gatherings, on vacations, in our home. It was strange how those images now felt like they belonged to someone else. The man in those pictures had trusted his wife. He had believed in love, in loyalty. He had been blind. I deleted the photos one by one. Each erased image was another step toward closing this chapter of my life. When I was finished, I took a deep breath and put my phone away. The weight on my chest felt lighter. I left the diner and drove home. Not to the house I had shared with Sarah, I wasn't going back there, but to a temporary apartment I had rented downtown. A place with no memories, no ghosts of the past. Just an empty space waiting to be filled with something new. That night, as I lay on a bed that wasn't mine, in a place that didn't yet feel like home, I allowed myself to think about the future. For the first time in a long time, I had no one else to consider, no compromises to make. My life was my own again. The divorce would be finalized soon. Sarah would be out of my life for good. And as for me? I didn't have all the answers yet. But I knew one thing: I would never allow myself to be deceived like that again. I closed my eyes and let sleep take me. Tomorrow was a new day. A new start. And this time, it was mine alone.